Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul. Justin Baker, co-host in studio. It's about freaking time. We got some acoustic panels, so hopefully the sound sounds a little bit better. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't at all, and you're like, cool way to waste your money on acoustic panels, but good thing they were free.
Yeah, $12 I spent on Amazon.
Well, they weren't free, but this is the second time they've been used.
Yes.
So technically now they cost you $6.
I guess, yeah. If you look at it that
Maybe,
way, sure.
you know,
Yeah,
that's,
okay.
That's all right. That's
Your voice sounds sexier, though.
Oh, wow.
So these are working on.
Wow, all right, perfect. On today's show, we are going to be rolling through the biggest busts of the season thus far. Of course, there's still, it feels like we're starting to get to the end of the season, but we still have about 30 games left to go of the season. But yes, these busts through the first 60% of the season or so is what we'll be doing. Before we get to that, there has been a trade. Cam Talbot has finally been shipped off to the Philadelphia Flyers. A very interesting type of move in exchange for Anthony Stolarz. Just give me your first thoughts here. Obviously, Carter Hart is the Flyers goaltender, but what is the advantage for the Flyers on this deal? As maybe they make a push for the playoffs, I guess, looking for a backup.
They find a healthy backup is what it is more than anything else.
As soon as he starts, it will be a record 8th goaltender starting for the Flyers.
Just insane. Yeah. I mean, we thought Vegas had problems with goaltender staying healthy last year.
Right.
Philly is just struggling. So, for Philadelphia, I mean, listen, they obviously think Carter Hart's the future net, but like any smart team, you're going to want to have that veteran guy back there to mentor him, to be there to play some games if needed. And we know Cam Talbot can be a starter, right? I mean, the last couple of years he was a starter for the Edmonton Oilers, and he played one season 70 some games. I can't remember what it was, but
right. I mean, I think
ridiculous.
That he ultimately now at this point in his career is probably just a very good backup. I think is what he could be.
Sure,
if he's has in the right system. The Oilers obviously. He just couldn't handle what they were throwing at him. It just wasn't working anymore. And but I think he could be a decent backup, right? Like,
yeah, I agree. I think he'll be fine as a backup role, and I think Philly is a good spot for him. There won't be, I don't want to say as much pressure on him because now that Carter Hart's there, right, the pressure is going to be more on him to carry the workload. So. When he went to Edmonton, obviously they got McDavid, and it's like, oh yeah, we got McDavid and Draisaitl. Let's make a push. You need to win 35 games a season. No, you can't put that kind of pressure on a guy, maybe that's just being a starter for the first time in his career. So,
had one great season,
right,
as the starter, and it all fell apart after that for whatever reason. I mean the Edmonton Oilers, though, are a mess. I mean, hey, we look and see what happened to the last goalie who left Edmonton for peanuts. He just became a Vezina candidate.
Yeah, thanks, Devin Dubnyk.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility that Cam Talbot does have a little bit of a turnaround, and he's not as bad as he's been. I don't think he's going to go and beat Devin Dubnyk, but... I mean, you do have to think. It's a nice trade for Philly. It's also frees up Edmonton to go and maybe acquire something.
Well, they had to free up the cap space so they can to get him off IR, which is just crazy that, like, they were talking extension for Talbot a few weeks ago. I kept hearing, like, hey, let's get him signed long term, and then it's like, oh, wait. We don't have any cap space. Who can we move?
See, now I'm wondering if really the talk of extension was, hey, we really like this guy, and teams start to go, oh, I mean, even though he's struggling, they still are willing to re-sign him. He must be they must still see something in him, and so it was maybe a ploy to get him dealt. Do you think he re-signs in Philadelphia?
Yeah, I think so, because I think there's going to be a lot of free agent goaltenders this summer, and good ones like Varlamov, Jimmy Howard. I mean, granted, I think Howard stays in Detroit ultimately, but there's going to be a lot of options. Your Mike Smiths, guys who have proven they can.
Well, and that's the thing is there's going to be a lot of options. Is Cam Talbot the option that you want to go with?
Well, I don't think
Philadelphia.
I don't think Philly makes his deal unless they think that he is their option to be a backup long term. Now, as far as Edmonton side of things, this is a really nice tidbit that I read about this morning. Most people don't realize Stolarz has got to start a minimum 10 games out of their last 25 in order for him to remain an RFA and not go into UFA status.
Oh.
So Edmonton is basically forcing themselves into playing this guy at least 10 out of the final 25 games, which
even isn't going to be too tough for them.
No, but I mean, if he craps the bed, it's like, oh, wait, we still have to play this guy if we want to keep him around.
Yeah, or it's just, hey, you saved enough money to bring back Sekera, and at the end of the season, you don't really mind letting Stolarz go, which I don't think anyone minds if he becomes a UFA.
No.
To me, it's not like he's going to make any more money on the open market than he would, being RFA and having to be matched.
No, I don't even think, like we talked about all the options, I don't even think he'd probably get, a backup job. He'd probably be a third stringer.
I don't know if they even match him.
Wow.
Like, just let him walk to free agency. I think they're just looking for the money. Well, that's it'll be interesting, to see if can the Flyers make any kind of run here. I mean, obviously they've been very hot. They've moved within 8 points of the playoffs, 8-1-1 in their last 10. It's certainly possible, but I see the Flyers like last year's Florida Panthers, where, hey, maybe they get a sniff, maybe they get within 4 points, 2 points, but ultimately you're just so far back, and teams ahead of them, you gotta think they gotta jump Carolina, who's been also rolling and are only 1 point out of the playoffs, and the team that they have to jump is the Penguins, and nobody's counting the Penguins out. The Penguins are going to be right here when the season ends. I don't see the Penguins sliding too far. They've won 2 in a row now. And then ahead of them, Montreal, 6-2-2 in their last 10. And Montreal's playing very well despite losing the other night to Nashville, and no one's going to blame them for losing to Nashville. And then they get to go play Tampa Bay. What a back-to-back. Nashville then Tampa. Okay, well, let's shift gears into what we came here to do. And that is to talk about some busts. I do just want to point out one thing. Before the show started, I was asking Justin if he had ever seen the show Sliders. Good old Jerry O'Connell. If you've ever seen the show, you remember him traveling between dimensions. Of course, great show, ahead of its time. But Nolan Patrick looks freaking exactly like Jerry O'Connell. I'm showing you the picture. He is freaking Jerry O'Connell back in the
young
mid-90s. Yes, of course, a young. I mean, they're probably about the same age there. So
it's kind of scary.
His picture on what I'm looking at, Hockey Reference, Nolan Patrick, looks so similar to Jerry O'Connell. It's hilarious. So
yeah, I'm going to post this up on Twitter
if you want to.
Get a side by side.
There you go. Okay, well, let's and just to start it off, Nolan Patrick is one of my busts. I actually didn't really rank these busts because there's quite a few of them, and I kind of ranked them in, hey, here's this cluster of players who I had certain expectations, and then here's a different cluster where maybe it was a bad signing and it's a bust. I don't have this like, here's my number 8, here's my number 9. Let's just talk about busts and why they're a bust and what maybe where we see them going in the future. I think I have a list of about 20 guys. I know that you ranked players and teams and events, so this will be fun. So Justin, throw out your first bust.
My first bust, William Nylander.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, for a guy that's, hypothetically costing Toronto $10 million this season, you're not getting much out of him. It's looking like a bust from a seasonal standpoint, right? 12 points through 29 games already, and I can't remember how long it took him to score a goal, but what was it, like 12 games or something ridiculous like that?
Yeah.
So for me right now, he's looking like a bust for this season because you got a hot Toronto team that scores goals like crazy. And granted, he's starting to get going a little bit, but
9 points in his last 10 games.
Yeah, so not bad, but as a whole for the season, it looks like a bust because he's a guy that I would have expected to put up, especially with the talent up front, to put up 60, 70 points, no problem.
Well, 60, 70 points in an 82 game season.
Exactly.
And I will say the bust goes along with taking so long to sign that contract.
Sure.
Because in reality, what he got was only, a very small amount higher. Obviously they're paying him the $10 million cap hit that he's making is just to make up for what he lost during the time that he missed. Really a bust all around where, I mean, why the hell didn't you just figure this out in the offseason? We could have all figured this out at that point. And, you know, it's bothersome. And to me, that is the reason why it's a bust, because you could have done this earlier and you could have avoided this rust, we'll say. I'd say he's more of a rust than a bust. Right? Like,
rust.
He was certainly rusty. You know, I think he had 3 points in his first 20 game, or was this? He had 4 points in his first 20 games. So pretty bad. But he's, of course, has looked better in the last end of January, early February. I mean, he looks so good now playing with Kadri, and the two of them, even though they haven't put up crazy points, he has had phenomenal possession. Every time he gets the puck, he looks like he's going to do something, and he's made that second power play unit look a little more dangerous. And so I think you'll see that in the end, it's not like the signing was a bust, but yes, what happened behind it, I will agree that it was certainly disconcerting, and things could have been better.
Could have, yes.
Well, you know, aside from Nolan Patrick, who the reason I brought him up, and Jerry O'Connell, is because he is a bust to me. This whole Philadelphia Flyers team really has been disappointing, because I think you look up and down that lineup. Sean Couturier has maybe not produced the way that you were hoping him to, and you know, you look at some of these guys' points totals, and in comparison to, you know, previous seasons, some of them don't look so bad. You know, you look and you're like, well, I mean, you know, a particular player has 35 points in 50 games. That's not too bad. But when you consider how other players have been playing over those 50 games, Claude Giroux, he's been fine, 61 points this season. Sean Couturier, 50 points. Voracek, his 49. You know, this top line, it's fine. You go ahead and leave them alone. But Wayne Simmons, 16 goals in 57 games. He only has 25 points. Shane Gostisbehere, 25 points in the 54 games. It just feels like some of these players should be having better years. And Nolan Patrick, to me, is kind of the pinnacle of their struggle, because here's a guy who's supposed to be able to now, this is his third season. This is the year where you're looking at a guy going, all right, it's time to get going. And he's got 20 points in 57 games. Or 54 games, sorry. 50 games, sorry. 50 games. He did miss a few. But, I mean, 11 goals in 50 games. That's and you know what? If you want to say, well, he's more of a playmaker. So, of course, his 11 goals is fine. Well, he has 9 assists. So, I mean, you got to think that, the guy's, he's only averaging less than 15 minutes a game.
So he's playing third line minutes.
He is playing third line. I mean, he's shooting at a 12.3% shooting percentage. He just doesn't shoot the puck all that much. Only 89 shots, so not even 2 shots a game. He's won 52% of his faceoffs, so he's not doing so bad in that area. But it's just the fact that he can't put up these points. I mean, if he wasn't a second overall pick, maybe this wouldn't be as big of a problem. But his expectations are that this is the year. I mean, this third year is a very crucial year, and it's looking like we're crossing our fingers that he scores 15 goals and gets 30 points. And that, to me, is a giant bust.
Yeah, it's even worse when you think about the fact that he was going to be the number 1 pick had he not had the injury issues,
sure.
Right before the draft. So that's
lucky for the Devils.
Right.
I don't know how much that draft was pretty weak at the top.
It was.
In comparison to the years around it, where, you know, he obviously had Austin Matthews and Patrick Laine, and then
Connor McDavid.
And you had Jack Eichel, and then this year you've got Jack Hughes, and last year you had Rasmus Dahlin. So, I mean, there's definitely a weaker draft class that year, but I think even Nico Hischier you could throw into. I don't think you throw Hischier into a bust category, but without Taylor Hall for the bulk of the year, and he has not looked the same. You know, you were hoping he'd take that next step. But anyways, let's hear your next bust.
My next bust, not a player, but a team, and in particular their power play, the Nashville Predators, league worst 12.9% power play.
Yes, Sam.
And yeah, you look at the talent they had. Granted, I mean, okay, a lot of people are going to make the argument, oh, well, PK Subban was hurt most of the year, so that's why the power play struggled, because he is a power play specialist. But I call a BS on that, because let's face it, with the talent they have up front with Ryan Johansson, Philip Forsberg, even though, again, injured, but Roman Josi, Ekholm, they have guys that can fill out a power play and should be able to produce more than 12.9%. That's, I mean...
Yeah, I do agree with the critics, I guess, on that the power play has been hurt by a lack of consistency with players. I mean, it's like Forsberg's in, he's back, and then Arvidsson, and then he's back, and then Subban. It's like they've been without one of their key guys. And, to me, the biggest problem with Nashville is that they do have this great team aspect, right? Like, we don't look at them and go, wow, they have so many high-end, top end players. And there's no superstar on this team. As much as, maybe a Philip Forsberg gets some notoriety, I do think he's a first-line winger, but he's not he's somewhere in the maybe 25 to 35 in terms of top wingers.
Okay.
He's nowhere near, he's not in the top 20.
No.
There's many guys you'll take over Philip Forsberg. He's a nice player to have up there. Same with Arvidsson. I'd say Ryan Johansson in terms of number one centers. He is a number one center, but he's somewhere between 25 and 30. He's not one of the top number one centers. Now, some teams have two number one centers, like the Leafs, like the Penguins. There's a lot of teams that have that nice 1-2 punch. Well, not a lot, but a few
Right.
teams that have that nice 1-2 punch. But to me, Nashville just doesn't have a lot of high-end guys. And so when one of them gets hurt, it really is a problem for their system, because they rely on this, they need to rely on having all their pieces in place in order to be a really good team. Because when they have to move that number two guy up, who, let's face it, Kyle Turris is a number two center, but he's barely a number two center. Same with Nick Bonino's barely a number three center, which is partially why they brought in Brian Boyle to try and maybe be able to give Boyle and Bonino the right
Spread
deployment.
out some minutes, yeah.
But when one guy's missing and somebody needs to slot up, because if you have a team who you have a nice number two center, your top center gets hurt, they have the ability to slide up. But Turris is not a good number one center. Like, he's nowhere near a number one center. And so then when Nick Bonino, who's barely a third center, has to move up into the second line, it's a big problem for this team. And so where we saw a depth at forward at one point, actually, you're bringing up the Predators. Kevin Fiala is one of my players who is a bust this year. He's not looked good. His underlying numbers are fine, but he just hasn't been able to produce. I think at a clip where last season you looked at how he played, and it looked like he was going to be this perennial 20-25 goal scorer. If you gave him enough the right ice time and the right deployment, he could maybe be a 30 goal scorer, and he just has not been able to produce there. And so you look at him, you throw in Austin Watson, who they've now lost for the rest of the year. It just... And maybe it's that may be their own fault for relying on a guy who it's been clear that he... didn't have his stuff together. I mean, he obviously has personal issues that he's now working through, which is all well and good. But you were relying on a guy who, I think this is what you get when you allow a guy like that to come back to your team before maybe he's legally ready. That doesn't mean that he's mentally ready. That doesn't mean that he's emotionally ready to come back and do something where you're under a lot of scrutiny. And it shows, obviously.
Okay, so question for you then. Fiala, restricted free agent after the season. Do you give him the 7-year deal like a lot of people get, or do you try to get a bridge deal out of this guy then right now?
So there's a lot of talk about Panarin in Nashville.
Ooh.
That I have seen that floated. Now, Panarin's been pretty clear about his ocean desires. I'm going to say this. I think if there's one city that maybe you're willing to go to that isn't on the ocean, could it be Nashville? Could it be a team that, has this ability to win now. I know he's, there's a lot of talk, Bobrovsky and Panarin to Florida, which I don't know why that would happen at the trade deadline. Why would Florida give up all the assets to have them come in and sign in a season that's lost? To me, you just wait for free agency. Whereas Nashville,
for those 8 years, that's why. But
for the 8, yeah. That's true. But whereas as for Nashville, maybe if you could convince him to stay, you'd be willing to give up Fiala. And obviously, it's going to take more than that, but Fiala would be a significant piece going the other way. If Nashville or if Columbus believed that they could take him and turn him around a little, I don't think he necessarily needs turning around. I think he just needs to be played more. I don't think the coaching staff in Nashville really likes him very much. It's that type of guy where it's just, you wonder if he just needs a new system, a new environment, and he'd be able to thrive. So it would be interesting. Nashville getting a Panarin, suddenly a lot of their power play problem could be solved. Their lack of a player who can really drive a full line by himself would be solved. And all their depth issues would be solved.
Yes, it would.
Could slot guys in the right place. So
yeah, that power play would be dangerous with him.
Yes, it would. Let me throw out a name. I'm going to go to some signings.
Okay.
That we can throw out James Neal as a guy who's just been
he did get on my list.
Complete and utter bust.
We've talked about him a ton.
We have. So we'll just gloss over him. I'm going to say Riley Nash, since we're on the Columbus Blue Jackets. He's not been great. They brought him in. That really their only significant signing. And when I consider that this was supposed to be kind of the year for Columbus, this was. They really needed to set themselves up to win this year because of knowing that maybe Bobrovsky and Panarin could both be gone. And this is a franchise, the only one left in the National Hockey League to never win a playoff series. It's time. And they could have set themselves up pretty well. Riley Nash right now in 55 games has a goal.
A goal.
Ooh. And I mean, he's only averaging 10-25 a game, a 1.9% shooting percentage, but I got to think that something's... I mean, he was a guy who was playing on Boston's first line when Patrice Bergeron was out, and he didn't look out of place. So You'd think that he could at least come up and play with some guys and give him the opportunity to play with higher-end players, and he's just not getting that amount of time, and it hasn't looked good for him. He hasn't gotten any power play time. Not that you really expected him to get a lot, but he's got none. And yeah, it looks like this team maybe to me this is probably going to be Tortorella's last year. They're going, all right, you've got these guys for one more year. See what you can do. They're going to likely limp into the playoffs here, and it might not be pretty. See what happens with this team over the next 6 months. It could be drastically different.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys on Columbus where you look at it and you're like, I want more, or I should be expecting more. Like Boone Jenner, Nick Foligno.
Wenberg, who's got 2 goals.
Yeah, there's all these guys. They have like potential written all over them, and now it makes you wonder, especially with a guy like Riley Nash, who, should have enough talent around him in Columbus to where he should be producing a little bit more, but now it makes you wonder, well, maybe it's not the players as much as it is the systems and the coaching and management now. So, yeah, I mean, this could be the writing on the wall for Tortorella to be like, well, I think we need to, especially if they lose Panarin and Bobrovsky, and then now you're basically almost have to hit the reset button.
Right. It's almost like, hey, we brought you in here for a reason, and now we don't really have the players here anymore that need to be pushed like that. So let's get a guy who can come in and develop some younger players for us, maybe. And
maybe Ken Hitchcock wants to go back to Columbus.
Oh God, gosh. I mean, this team's in big trouble if and when Panarin leaves. I mean, they really have maybe 3 other players who can score 20 goals. So that's going to be a problem. Okay, I'm going to throw out a couple defensemen. Cody Ceci, who, not that I don't think that people thought that he was a super high-end defenseman, but he is last in the league in shot attempts. He's minus 300 for shot attempts, so he's been on the ice for 300 more shot attempts than he is given. So that's brutal. obviously a result of being also on a bad team. I think the bottom three in the league are Cody Ceci, Chris Tierney, and another senator. I can't remember who. So a result of being on a bad team, but he is the worst of the worst in that sense. Also, Josh Manson for the Anaheim Ducks, I think, has taken quite a step backwards.
I like that pick.
For a guy who is supposed to kind of be this next wave of Ducks defensemen, he has really fallen off the map to me. A lot of Ducks players have fallen off the map. I have Jakob Silfverberg on this list too, but I'm not so worried about Silfverberg because I think
his two-way game is great, so I give him a little grace.
Yes.
With.
Well, and we've had these expectations of, wow, he's a great shot. He should be scoring all these goals. And at some point, you have to go, he's actually not a goal scorer. He maybe has a nice looking shot, but he's not a goal scorer. He'll score goals for you, but he's not ultimately a guy who's going to slot into your top six. Silfverberg is a great top 9 player. He should be playing on a third line, penalty killing, and when you have injuries, he can move up into the lineup, and he's fine. I think the Ducks move him, and I think that he'll look pretty good on whoever he goes to. But to me, Josh Manson, Cody Ceci, 2 defensemen. Maybe I'd throw Justin Falk in there as well. Some of my bigger busts for the year. Justin Falk, I think, only has 20 points through 50-something games this year. And I think he's been a bust because he's been underutilized, and he's a player that should be moved. Probably, when he's an unrestricted free agent, will probably leave Carolina. And so he's maybe not a bust so much as he's a guy who I'm disappointed in, because he has been perennial, a guy who's pushing the 45-point total every year.
Okay. Respect. So a name for me, Valerie Nichushkin.
Mm-hmm. No goals.
A bust.
No goals.
A giant bust. First tour around in Dallas wasn't the worst thing in the world. Although, again, I expected more out of him when he was there. Went back to Russia. Dallas convinced him to come back because, let's face it, you want to play in the NHL, and Dallas still own their rights to this kid. He was thought to be their secondary scoring guy, the guy that was going to revive Spets a little bit on that second line and help them spread out the offense a little more outside of those top 3 big names. And it has just not happened at all. It's been disastrous for him.
Yeah, he only 0.83 points per 60, which there's only 38 players in the league that have less than a point per 60.
It's disgusting.
And Nichushkin is one of them. So that's, if you don't know points per 60, it's just how many points that you get per 60 minutes of actually playing, not per game, but per 60 minutes. So every time he's on the ice for 60 minutes, he doesn't even get a point.
Yeah, kind of sad.
That's rough. I mean, you're in Roman Polak territory.
Ooh.
So that's pretty rough. Speaking of a guy another Duck, who's 4th last in the league out of guys who have played more than 30 games this year, is Ryan Kessler. He's 0.43 points per 60, which to give you an idea, Roman Polak has 0.41 points per 60. So Ryan Kessler right now is about on par with Roman Polak in terms of production. And I mean, we'll go to the tops of the league in terms of that. Nikita Kucherov, almost 5 points per 60 for the league lead. The average, I'd say, your average top player is somewhere between 2 and 4 points per 60. 4, obviously, you're getting really close to the tops of the league, but when you're below 1, that's just terrible. And Ryan Kessler should retire and go on LTIR and just save the Ducks from having to.
And he's refusing to waive his trade clause so the Ducks can move him out.
Yeah, I mean, you should healthy scratch him every game.
I would.
He's absolute. He is absolute. I mean, he is as useless as Roman Polak, but at least Polak is useful in the defensive zone. I mean, Ryan Kessler is utterly useless at this point. He just needs to be shut down. Put him on a healthy scratch.
I thought for a minute when that S was coming out of your mouth for shut down, I thought you were going to do take him out back and shoot him.
Oh, yeah. Things have gotten very violent here in Russia. That's what they do in the KHL.
The KHL.
Let's hear who else you got. What other bus? Let's hear I know you have some events as busts. I want to hear some of these.
Okay. Well, events. I don't know if I'd call them events, but more or less
a lack thereof.
Yeah. The bottom half of the West is a bust for me, and I say that because you look at the standings, right? It's easy to look at the top teams in the West and see how good they are: Calgary, San Jose, Winnipeg. But you look at the bottom half, and it's like everybody is so bad or so undesiring of those last couple playoff spots that nobody really wants to go out and take it. I mean, two teams in California, Ducks and the Kings, are just bombing out. We talked about them a bit, and Edmonton, who has this grand opportunity to give their fans a little something, just seem to can't try to grab a playoff spot.
Lost 3 in a row, 7-2 in their last 10, and they went from being 2 points out of a playoff spot to now they're 7 points out of a playoff spot, and they're eliminated. They're done.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And the Chicago Blackhawks now have thrown themselves back in the playoff picture after sitting at the bottom of the West for a majority of the season. Now all of a sudden, Patrick Kane can't stop, and they're 8-2-0 in their last 10, and it's like, oh wait, they're good again? What is this?
But then here's the weird... See, this is where I agree with you. The bottom half of the West is a bust. I'm going to say the Western Conference as a whole is as wide open as we've ever seen it in the league. When I think Winnipeg, top in the league, they go and they lose to a Colorado team that has been terrible. They lose 4-1 to Colorado the other night. And... I mean, you're looking at a Western Conference that even the top teams, Nashville, Winnipeg, there's a lot of question marks. I mean, I have Patrick Laine as one of my busts. He's 25 goals, so how much of a bust can he be? But 35 points on the year.
Yeah,
and the bust to me maybe isn't Laine. It's the fact that management never really did anything to acquire any guy who could play alongside him, because him and Brian Little just don't look good together.
No, they don't.
It's just not working. It didn't really work well last year. And I mean, granted, you've got a team like St. Louis just chugging right now, winning 8 in a row. But we know this, like, St. Louis is not that good. Even though they're playing really well right now, St. Louis doesn't scare me. Nashville doesn't scare me. The only two teams that I would say, all right, this team scares me. San Jose, actually, now that they're figuring out their life here, I mean, they just lost 5-1 to Washington, but San Jose, I guess, in the playoffs, they're going to be scary.
Yeah, I mean, if Martin Jones can get his act together,
yes, if they can get their better goaltending,
very dangerous.
Is Martin Jones the next Jake Allen? I don't know. And the Tampa Bay Lightning. Other than that, outside of those teams, I mean, yes, Winnipeg is a good team, but I mean, if I'm Vegas, I think I could beat Winnipeg again.
Yeah, I mean,
like, Vegas still hasn't been that good, but I wouldn't be that scared. Although Vegas, I don't think beats San Jose this year. I'm not scared of Calgary. If I'm let's say that I'm the Chicago Blackhawks and I somehow squeeze into the playoffs. This is maybe the year where some team at the bottom, maybe a trade deadline acquisition, maybe Chicago just goes, you know what, we can get this guy for cheap. Let's go bring in somebody, or maybe Chicago goes and they say, let's bring back Panarin. Maybe Panarin would go back to Chicago, and suddenly you're looking different. Maybe Chicago goes and I don't know. There's so many opportunities to win this conference because I don't think the top end is that good. We'll see what happens at the deadline.
I think one of those top end teams needs to make a big move.
Duchesne or a Stone could come into those, and then suddenly we're talking a little bit different. But to me, the Eastern Conference, for all of Washington's struggles, I think we're going and we're saying come playoff time, they're still a scary team. They won the cup last year. We'll give that to them. The Islanders, even. Just because Barry Trotz is their coach,
nobody will score on him.
He can't be beaten right now. But then you've got Tampa Bay, you've got Toronto, you've got Boston. I mean, there's some scary team. Does anyone want to play Pittsburgh in the first round?
Nope.
You're Tampa Bay right now. You're looking at the Pittsburgh Penguins in the first round. Is that really the first round matchup that you want?
Dang, that's yeah. I mean,
there's just a big disparity between the two conferences.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, even if you're Pittsburgh, right, and you end up playing the Islanders, I would probably think the Islanders would lose that series, but that's another discussion. So,
or Montreal. Yeah, it's. I'm going to go with a couple goaltenders.
Okay.
Who, bust is a hard word, but it's more or less because of injuries. Corey Schneider and Roberto Luongo. Although Corey Schneider did win his first game in 14 months last night. Luongo is a great ambassador for the game. His teammates love him. When he's in, he's pretty decent of a goaltender. Just can't seem to stay healthy. And I see it as it is one of the biggest problems for the Florida Panthers, is that if you are constantly wondering if a guy is going to be able to play the next game, it's got to wear on a team. This team is not as bad as they look in the standings. Right now they're the seventh in line for one of these wild card spots. They're 11 points out of the playoffs, and they're 11 points out of both the wild card and the bottom of the Metro. Doesn't look like a team that's going to make any kind of significant run here at the end like last year, despite having some pretty high-end talent in their forward position and decent defensemen as well. So I think that goaltending is ultimately this team's issue because they can't stay healthy. So
yeah, and I think that's an easy reason why you...
Same with New Jersey.
Absolutely, and I think that's an easy reason why you keep hearing Bobrovsky's name floated around in Florida a lot, is because, why wouldn't you want a guy like that? I think if you did bring him in, he could solidify that position for you. Sure. And gosh, get a Vezina guy back there. And let's look bottom four teams in the East: Florida, Detroit, New Jersey, Ottawa. All right, we all know Ottawa's bad. We're just going to leave them down there. The New Jersey Devils, they made the playoffs last year. They virtually have the same team this year, and they can't seem to win a game. And a lot of that is because of goaltending. Keith Kincaid is a fine backup, but he's not a long-term starter. And so I think that's been their main issue. Same with Florida. But then you look at Detroit. I actually think Detroit would be further down the standings if it weren't for Jimmy Howard. Now, imagine Jimmy Howard was on the Florida Panthers or on the New Jersey Devils. I think you'd see these teams right on the bubble of the playoffs, and that's the difference of a good goaltender and a not so good one. So, well, there you
go. Who else you got? Oh, I want to hear your Patrick Kane one.
My Patrick Kane one, yes. Patrick Kane not being dealt is a bust to me, only because I agree that Chicago could make the playoffs. Yeah, I think the West is wide open where maybe they could make a little bit of noise, but ultimately I don't think, even if they somehow manage to get past the first round matchup, somehow miracle, right? They're not getting past the second round. They're not going to go anywhere in the playoffs, in my opinion, without a healthy Corey Crawford back there and their defense somehow magically figuring out how to skate fast again.
You love their backup, though.
Oh, my gosh.
What's his name?
Delia. Yeah, he's a great backup. I'm cool with him, but we're best friends. So, yeah, so to me, I think the fact that Chicago they've been kind of like Detroit for the last few years, right? Where they need a rebuild, they need to retool, but they don't want to admit it, right? So Detroit basically floated around for a long time, being a bust in the first round for 3 straight years. I think to Tampa, they lost all 3 of those.
Right.
Or in Boston 1 year. And then now you've been missing the playoffs for the last few seasons, and they've never really come out until this season and said, okay, well, I guess we got to do kind of a rebuild sort of thing. And Chicago's at that point where I think they need to admit, okay, hey, let's get on the rebuild. And I think not trading Patrick Kane is hindering them from doing that, because when you have a guy of this talent level, kind of like the Edmonton Oilers, where you're like, we can't do a rebuild because we have such a good player back there. Not trading him is keeping Chicago from being good again. So, yeah, that's a bust to me.
See, now I would say the fact that you still have Duncan Keith and you still have Brent Seabrook and you still you've got all these guys that should be dealt before Patrick. To me, Patrick Kane, you keep him around, and in 2 years when you're ready to roll again, he's still one of your guys,
right? And he's 30 years old, and I think 3-4 years left, you're going to get good production. Then he's probably going to be a 50-60 point player, in my opinion. Who knows?
But the league's going, he might be an 80 point.
Well,
player.
That's true. Actually, he might.
Everyone else will have 150 points,
right? See, so regardless, his production's still going to be there for a while. But I think when you have his production there, you're just not ready to admit to the rebuild, so you won't want to, you can't force maybe Duncan Keith and Seabrook's hands to say, hey, guess what? You're on a crappy team, so do you want to waive it now? Because if Chicago really sucked, and they were going to suck for a while knowing Patrick Kane's not there, or maybe even Jonathan Toews wasn't there, maybe Keith and Seabrook might say, okay, well, Sure. Okay. Yeah. Oh, we'll leave then. We'll leave.
there's only a few teams that could even take on his cap hit.
Right.
That's obviously you're trading players for him as well. You're not just trading futures.
Yeah, that's the thing.
But I mean, it's, nevertheless, to bring in that kind of money is we look at a team like Carolina. They have $16 million in cap space. They have not traditionally been a team who spends to the cap. Neither has New Jersey. Neither has Colorado. There's quite. I mean, funny enough, the Montreal Canadiens have quite a bit of cap space compared to the rest of the league, but they actually have more than the Arizona Coyotes. But there's these teams where they definitely have an internal cap, and so you wonder how many teams could actually take on Patrick Kane and his monster salary. You talk especially for the rest of that deal too. You get to the back end of that deal and it might not look very good.
Yeah, well, I think with his production, I think you can eat most of that just because, again, I think the cap is going to keep raising to the point where it doesn't look as bad, I guess. So
the cap can go up, but that doesn't mean you got more money.
Yeah, that's true.
We'll throw out a couple more higher end names, players who haven't been awful, but I think given the fact that everyone's scoring is up and Jamie Benn's scoring is down, that is a bad sign for the Dallas Stars.
Yeah,
he's not looked great. He's not quite as fast as he was, and you got to think a power forward like him. You're wondering, you're in your 30s now. What's that going to look like through the remainder of that contract? And is Tyler Seguin, can he continue to carry Jamie Benn? Where Jamie Benn's making $9.5 million for the next 6 years after this, so it's not like his contract is expiring anytime soon. Really, this is a year where you're hoping to see, where he's got 39 points. It seems like everyone else is averaging around a point per game, and he's struggling to really stay above that 0.6 points per game. You really like to see him performing a little bit better, and so to me, he's your like higher end type of bust, along with Clayton Keller. I'll throw him in there. I think after what we saw last year in his rookie season, we're almost expecting it's going to be a really good year for him, especially the way that speed has really taken over, and he's a guy who can absolutely fly. He does lead the team in scoring, 38 points in 57 games. I'm a little more concerned about the fact that he only has 11 goals in 57 games.
Yeah, it seemed like he was scoring at will to start the season last year.
Yes, and last year what he ended up with, I think 21 goals or something like that, or maybe
it's still a respectable number, but
sure. But when I look at 11 goals, I think he had 23 goals last year. So 11 goals, I mean, you're not even on pace for 20 goals. And that's a problem to me when you are your team's, you're supposed to be a goal scorer and you're struggling to score. So Clayton Keller, maybe it's the fact that he doesn't have much around him. I'll throw Derek Stepan into that list too, where, I mean, he's probably the worst number one center in the league, but only 26 points in 57 games. So struggle bus.
Yeah. Okay. So I got 3 high-end names for you because they were the number one line last year on a team that went to the finals. Carlson, Smith, and Marchessault. I throw them in as bust because, don't get me wrong, I don't think anybody expected a guy like for Wild Bill to put up 40 points again.
40 goals.
Right. 40 goals. Sorry.
40 points we did.
Right. He's already going to hit 40 points a season. But you look at these guys, right? A team that should have been just as, I don't want to say as dangerous, but should have been pretty dangerous this season. Carlson, 37 points in 59 games, 40 points for Marchessault. Riley Smith, 31 points.
How many goals does Carlson have right now?
18.
18.
Yeah, so definitely not going to.
Still probably will hit 30,
maybe.
Especially because they've been, I'll say this, out of the 50 some odd games that they played so far, that the second half of those 60 games has been much better.
Sure. Yeah. But their best player so far, to me, Alex Tuck right now.
Yes.
And maybe you can throw Paul Stastny's name in there when he's been healthy. So those two guys.
Paul Stastny's averaging almost a point per game.
23 and 29 games. And he's been pretty good. So to me, I think, I think they've already started splitting up. I don't know how many games it's been now, but it's been a little while now that they've taken Riley Smith off that top line, and I think, if you wanted to be as good this year as you were last year, I think I expected more out of those guys, to be quite honest. So that's kind of a bust for me.
Okay, I'm going to say Patrick Maroon has really screwed himself over. I think he took this 1-year deal kind of I remember he said, I'm going to bet on myself, and I'm going to bet that I can go and I can have this turnaround year. And he's got 4 goals. Obviously, the whole Blues team had been playing pretty bad. It's looking like he will probably be a guy who he'll get another contract for maybe a year. He's going to be a guy who is just at the bottom of any team's lineup, and going a long way from playing with Connor McDavid a few years ago and getting dealt to the New Jersey Devils, and he looked okay there, and he just has really dropped off rather quickly. And if he had signed a multi-year deal, even if it was for a little bit less, he would have had some security. And so he bet on himself, and he bet wrong. So that's a little bit of a bust. Ilya Kovalchuk, are we going to say that's a bust?
I'm not ready to say he's a bust yet.
I'm gonna say that this year has been very disappointing.
I think it's more on coaching, because
stupid signing.
Yeah.
Oh, we're trying to get faster.
Right.
Let's sign a guy who can't skate.
Yeah, that's a bust in signing itself, but I don't think as a player. I think he's been fine. I just think it's more or less coaching that has decided, let's not put him in top 6 minutes. Let's just throw him at the bottom and just hope it pans out. And I'm like, no, that's stupid. Don't.
Yeah. So who on the LA Kings is the bust?
Is the bust?
Because it's not Kopitar. I wouldn't say it's Kopitar. I'm not going to say it's Doughty.
No, and I'm not ready to throw a guy like Dustin Brown in that mix yet, because I didn't expect a ton from him.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Jeff Carter.
No, I honestly might
20 something points here. Hasn't looked great.
I would probably go with a Tyler Toffoli or maybe Tanner Pearson when he was in LA.
But is he the reason that they're losing?
No, I don't think they're the reason that they're losing.
Your
I think
second line center is brutal.
Yeah, I don't know. I would probably say it's coaching more than anything else is why they're losing, because they have slow players. They have what they like. They are what they are, right? But everybody expects them somehow to get faster. But they're not going to get faster. So why would you tailor your game to be a fast team, but you're not a fast team?
Yeah, it's funny that the whole league says let's go to speed. Well, okay, there's always this. All right, the whole league went one way. We're going to try something different. Isn't this the time to try something different? Maybe.
Sure.
I don't know. It just seems to make sense
because you don't have the speed. So.
I won't say that the Islanders are the fastest team out there, and they've managed to put things together, and they do have some fast. But every team has a couple fast players, but they play with some speed, but they definitely play a really solid defensive game as well. Who else you have?
Yeah, I'll give you one more name. So, I should say names, because to me, it's NHL starting goalies. And I say that with guys that came into the season as starters and either have crapped the bed or just skated by on, the skin of their teeth, whatever that saying is, or guys that have lost their jobs. And so a few names to throw out. We talked about Cam Talbot, right? Mm-hmm. A bust there. Mike Smith, a guy who I figured as high as a scoring team as Calgary's been, it should have been easy for him to stop the puck, because when you're scoring goals, you have the puck more. So, sure. But granted, sometimes you do give up defense to score goals. He's
old and
okay. So, Martin Jones, for example, barely. I'm not even at 900 right now, and so for a save percentage like that on a team that is as good as San Jose is, if he had played a little bit better,
there's a team that needs Jimmy Howard at San
Jose. Yeah, absolutely. Varlamov in Colorado, I expected a lot more out of him, especially now that you have
Grubauer.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You have Grubauer in there pushing you to say, hey, we just gave him a 3-year extension, so that means you play really good, or we're going to replace you with this guy as the starter. And then Braden Holtby, to me, too, is another guy, and which Braden Holtby maybe isn't as so much on him as it is the system now that his team is adjusting to without Trotz there. Maybe that has something to do with it. But again, I think there's a lot of starting goaltenders that I expected to be better even with scoring up, and they just have either lost their starting jobs or crapped the bed.
Interesting. I want to ask you about the Red Wings. to me, there's one guy who is a bust on this team more than any other.
I was going to say there's a few busts on that team, but
who to you is the biggest disappointment of the year?
Justin Applicator.
Okay, so you had expectations for him. See, I had none.
Yeah.
I have none for him because of what he did last year and the year before.
See, my expectation for him was the fact that, yeah, he didn't play so hot last year, but I figured, you know what? They're in this period now where they're going to shift to younger players. He's one of their leaders in the locker room. You know, he wears that A on his sweater, garbage. And I thought, you know, they're going to give him more ice time just to kind of play alongside guys like Larkin and Anthony Seo on those top 6 minutes. And, you know, he should produce a little bit more, right? I wasn't expecting like 50, 60 points out of the guy and 25, 30 goals, but I was certainly expecting him maybe to put up, you know, 20 goals, 30 points this season or somewhere close to it. And
he is one of those guys under 1 point
there
per
you go.
60. So yeah, you're not wrong there. For me, it's Anthony Mantha.
Mantha, yeah, okay.
Yeah, Anthony Mantha, 22 points in 43 games, those 12 goals. He's getting 17 minutes and 18 seconds a game, so he just hasn't looked like he's comfortable. And I thought that there was a chance that he could be a guy who could drive a line a little more. Maybe not be the primary guy, but be that good, solid second guy in a line. I mean, he's got 1.77 points per 60. It's not bad. But the way that he has, I don't know. It's when I watch him play, I felt like last year there was more there. There was more on the table for him. So I don't know if it's just his line mates have changed or if it's that, you know, just because this team has been bad, he hasn't gotten the same types of opportunities on the power play.
Yeah, so he's been dealing with some health issues this season. And I think that has a little bit to do with it, but I'm not going to say that that's the reason why. I think more than anything else, it's the fact that the lines are constantly changing. I think the only consistent line pairings that I've seen all year long is Nyquist and Larkin on that top line, and everything else is shuffled so much. When you have, you know, a young, fast, you know, power forward like Mantha, who should be utilized, I think a lot differently, when you're throwing him with guys like Franz Nielsen, who, you know, they're on their last leg. They can't really get up and down the ice as quick anymore and can't keep up with a guy like that. You know, they're not like a Thomas Vanek, for example, or a guy who's not fast. We know he's not fast, but yet he's smart enough to play the game in a way to where he doesn't need the speed,
sure,
right?
Vanek's been exactly what they thought.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they don't have that second line center to consistently set Mantha with to where he can, you know, utilize his talents the way they should be. Now, you know, maybe Anthony Seo needs to be played at center a lot more, and maybe they need to give him second line minutes. Maybe that might help. But, you know, the Red Wings aren't doing that. They're playing him on the wing more than anything else and giving him third line minutes, which is driving me nuts. But, yeah, I think coaching has a lot to do with that. So we'll see.
Okay. I'm going to throw out one more player just because I can on the Leafs. I'm going to say that Nikita Zaitsev, where, you know, 2 years ago he played all right. He was decent. He got that big contract. And then last year he really struggled. He got hurt, and he came out and he said, you know, I wasn't myself. I did a lot in the offseason, blah, blah, blah. And it is apparent that he did not. You know, I mean, 7 points in 57 games. He never was a big point producer, but he's at the bottom of the team in a lot of possession statistics, and he just has not looked very good and is probably playing with the wrong type of player. I mean, he's made Jake Gardiner look terrible because he's been out of position often, and so it's just all around.
He's the reason they had to go get Muzzin.
Oh, in my opinion. I mean, I don't think you might have a Muzzin anyways, but yes.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I think you'll see Zaitsev play less and less and Muzzin play more and more. I mean, Jake Muzzin has been really, he's been their least amount of ice time out of all their defensemen averaged through the games he's been there. But, you know, of course, you're easing a guy into a new system and whatnot. But I think you'll see come playoff time, he'll be playing a lot.
Yeah.
So. All right. Well, any last busts before we call it a day?
No, I wouldn't say. I was going to throw Ottawa's ownership into that group of bust, but they've been a bust for a long time, so no expectations there.
Yeah, I guess we could throw Derek Brassard out there, or maybe Nemesnikov. You know, he was supposed to be one of the key pieces coming in that McDonough deal, and he's played a little bit better as of late, but I think that's because he's hoping he gets moved.
Exactly.
Like, hey, we might trade you. Okay, I'll play sweet. So, I can.
So teams like,
Really what you should do is you should play bad so that you lower your value so that the team that you're getting traded to doesn't have to give up as much. That would be the ideal. It's the conspiracy theory of getting traded at the deadline. So, all right, well, you can follow us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk, and we will talk to you guys next week. Have a good weekend.